The galaxy saw a beggar, but one human saw a princess. That choice could save millions. The story begins. Listen closely. The planet Vidia had never pretended to be kind. Its skies were a permanent haze of burnt orange, thick with dust particles lifted from the jagged mountain ranges that dominated its surface. The air carried a metallic tang sharp enough to sting the lungs of newcomers until their bodies grudgingly adapted. Vidia was not a world anyone chose for its beauty or comfort. It was a place people ended up because they had debts, no options, or simply nowhere else in the galaxy to go. The mining colony of New Prospect clung stubbornly to existence in a narrow valley where the mountains opened just wide enough to allow ships to land. The settlement had been founded with grand promises of prosperity, but those had quickly withered under the reality of ore extraction. Prefabricated modules had been bolted together in haphazard patterns, augmented by endless makeshift shacks and lean-tos thrown up by desperate migrants. Power conduits ran openly through the muddy streets, leaking sparks when the insulation frayed. The colony smelled perpetually of two things: industrial lubricant from the mining rigs and alien spices from the food stalls that catered to the diverse labor force. For most humans, it was an assault on the senses. But Mark Hayes no longer noticed. 3 years on, Vidia had dulled his sense of smell, numbed him to the noise, and hardened him to the sight of suffering. He had arrived as an outsider, a mechanic looking for work, thinking he might stay a season or two. Yet New Prospect had a way of swallowing people whole. The work was constant, the credits reasonable, and if a man kept his head down, he could carve out a life in the cracks of this rough-edged society. Mark was tall, broad-shouldered, his sandy blonde hair perpetually matted with dust, and his steel blue eyes carried the distant look of someone who had seen too much trouble to ever be surprised again. His hands bore the scars of machinery, burns, cuts, oil stains that never fully washed away. The gray utility vest strapped across his chest carried a mechanic's arsenal, hydraulic spanners, circuit testers, micro welders. He looked exactly like what he was, one more laborer among the thousands who kept the colony's beating heart of industry from collapsing. That morning, he walked with a sandwich in his hand wrapped in thin synthetic paper. Roast beef with mustard, barely more than scraps, but it was fuel for the early shift at the Eastern Mining Complex. His stomach growled, but Mark ignored it. After years in New Prospect, hunger had become background noise. He had learned to ration his energy just as he rationed everything else. The streets were waking slowly. Vendors raised the shutters of their stalls. Miners in stained exosuits trudged toward the transport shuttles. Alien merchants from half a dozen worlds argued in sharp tones that clashed like metal on metal. Above it all, the mountains loomed gray and merciless. Mark turned a corner and saw the crooked neon sign of Ma's Diner, a place infamous across New Prospect. It was run by Ma, a four-armed Vexillian matron, whose cooking was as remarkable as her temper was foul. Miners risked verbal abuse and thrown utensils because her food actually tasted like food rather than nutrient paste. Mark had intended to duck in for a quick drink before heading to the complex. But then he saw her. Huddled on the cold sill of a metal window just outside the diner was a small figure. At first glance, she looked like a child, thin limbs, oversized eyes, but Mark's experience told him otherwise. She was Lydian, one of the humanoid species known for their delicate features and luminous skin. This one was female, likely equivalent to a human teenager in years. Her silvery blue hair hung in matted strands across her face. What might once have been a clean white jumpsuit was now a canvas of grime, tears, and stains. Her cheeks were hollow, her lips cracked. In her hand, she clutched a piece of bread so stale it looked more like stone than food. She gnawed at it cautiously, her posture defensive, as if expecting someone to snatch even this miserable scrap away. Passers-by walked on without a glance. To them, she was just another refugee, one more displaced soul in a galaxy overflowing with them. New Prospect was full of hard-luck cases. No one had the time or energy to care about every stray alien that washed up in the colony streets. Mark slowed. He should have kept walking. His shift started in less than 20 minutes, and Foreman Briggs had no tolerance for lateness. This girl wasn't his problem. But he didn't move. His eyes locked on hers, and what he saw stopped him cold. Her eyes were enormous, luminous, even through the dirt that streaked her face. They were not the eyes of a child. They were weary, far too old for her fragile frame. And yet there was still something in them, something that caught in his chest like a hook. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. He changed course, heading straight for her. The girl tensed instantly, shrinking back against the wall, clutching the stale bread like a weapon. Her large eyes widened, full of suspicion and fear. Mark stopped a respectful distance away. He kept his voice low, gentle, the way one might speak to a wounded animal. "Hey," he said, "you look hungry." She didn't answer. She just stared at him motionless. Mark unwrapped his sandwich. The roast beef and mustard smell drifted through the dust-laden air. He held it out, extending his arms slowly so she could see. "Here," he said, "this is better than that rock you're eating." For a long moment, nothing happened. Her gaze flicked between his face and the food torn between need and fear. "I'm not going to hurt you," Mark said softly. "Promise." At last, with trembling fingers, she reached out. She took the sandwich and sniffed it cautiously, then bit carefully at the edge. The reaction was immediate. Her eyes widened in shock, then again in wonder. She took a larger bite, then another. Hunger overcame hesitation. Mark smiled faintly and sat on the edge of the windowsill beside her, keeping enough distance not to feel threatening. "Good right?" he asked. "Not fancy, but beats dumpster diving." The girl nodded slightly, chewing with the desperate focus of someone who didn't know when the next meal might come. "I'm Mark," he offered. "What's your name?" She hesitated mid-bite. At last she whispered, "Siri." The sound of her voice surprised him, soft, melodic, even though laced with caution. "Nice to meet you, Siri," he said. "You new to New Prospect?" She nodded, swallowing. "Family?" he asked carefully. Her eyes dropped. She shook her head. Mark ran a hand through his dusty hair. He had seen enough strays to know what that meant. Alone, vulnerable, easy prey. "There's a shelter in the eastern quarter," he suggested. "Not great, but better than the street. They might—" "No shelters?" Siri interrupted. Her voice was sharper now, her fear raw. "They find me there." Mark frowned. "Who finds you?" But she just shook her head, burying herself in the sandwich again. His wrist communicator beeped 15 minutes until his shift. Foreman Briggs would be counting the seconds. "Listen," Mark said, "I've got to get to work, but I'll come back here after my shift around 7. Will you be here?" Siri looked at him with uncertainty. Trust was not something she gave easily. "I'll bring more food," he added with a smile. That seemed to tip the balance. She gave the tiniest of nods. "Okay," Mark said gently. "Stay safe until then." He stood ready to hurry off, but then felt a light touch on his arm. He turned back. Siri looked up at him, the sandwich half-eaten in her hand. "Thank you," she said simply. Mark froze. Something in her expression struck him with unexpected force. Gratitude, yes, but more than that, a quiet dignity that transcended her ragged state. For a moment, he did not see a dirty refugee. He saw something else entirely. "You're welcome," he said quietly. Then he forced himself to leave, though his stomach remained empty and his mind anything but. All day, as he patched hydraulic lines and repaired drilling rigs at the Eastern Complex, his thoughts kept circling back to the blue-skinned girl on the windowsill. He had seen countless refugees before, even helped some when he could. But this one was different. Her fear when he mentioned the shelter. The way she said, "They find me there." The strange dignity in her eyes when she whispered her thanks. Siri was not just another stray. And somehow Mark Hayes knew his life had just changed forever. The day at the Eastern Mining Complex was long, even by New Prospect standards. The machines were ancient, patched together from spare parts in desperation, and they never seemed to rest. Mark spent hours wedged into tight service ducts, welding ruptured coolant lines, sealing hydraulic leaks, and replacing stripped gears that screamed whenever the drills bit too deeply into Vidia's stubborn crust. The roar of machinery and the constant tremors of rock being torn from the planet's belly created a background noise that never ceased. Miners cursed in half a dozen languages. Sparks cascaded around him. The recycled air reeked of metal and sweat. It was the kind of day that blurred together with every other, where survival meant shutting off your mind and just working until your body gave out. But today, Mark's mind refused to shut down. Every time his hands tightened a bolt or patched a cable, his thoughts drifted back to the blue-skinned girl outside Ma's diner. Siri. He remembered her trembling fingers taking the sandwich, the shock in her eyes at the taste of real food, the way she whispered her name as if it were a secret too dangerous to share, and her words echoed in his head like a warning. They find me there. Who were they? Why would a teenage refugee fear the shelters, miserable though they were? By the time his shift ended, Mark was exhausted, his muscles aching, but his resolve was sharper than ever. He had promised her food. He had promised he would return. NVIDIA promises were rare. Too many people broke them to survive another day. But Mark Hayes wasn't like most people. He couldn't be. So when the whistle signaled the end of the shift, he didn't head back to his quarters like everyone else. Instead, he detoured to the commissary. He spent more credits than he could afford on supplies, fresh bread, packaged protein, and even a small tin of fruit preserved in syrup, a luxury in a place like New Prospect. As he carried the bundle in his work vest, a faint smile tugged at his lips. It wasn't much, but to Siri it might be everything. The streets at night were more dangerous than during the day. Shadows pooled in every alley. Miners staggered out of gambling dens, half drunk on synthetic liquor. Alien mercenaries loitered in doorways, eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. Somewhere in the distance, a fight broke out, followed by the sharp crack of a pulse pistol. No one rushed to help. No one ever did. Mark kept his head low and moved with purpose. His boots echoed against the uneven metal plates that served as sidewalks, each step bringing him closer to Ma's diner. Above the settlement, Vidia's twin moons glowed faintly through the dust-choked sky, casting the streets in eerie shades of violet and gray. When he reached the diner, his heart sank. The windowsill where Siri had sat was empty. He froze, scanning the area. The alleys, the doorways, the shadows that clung to the walls. Nothing, no flash of silver hair, no luminous eyes, no fragile figure huddled against the cold. For several long minutes, Mark just stood there, clutching the food bundle so tightly that the bread was nearly crushed. A heavy knot formed in his chest. He had promised her he would come back, looking for the blue girl. The voice was rough, gravelly. Mark turned. It was Ma herself standing behind the diner's exterior counter, wiping it down with two of her forearms. Her leathery face, dominated by three jet-black eyes, shifted into something that might have been sympathy or maybe just annoyance. "Yes," Mark said quickly, stepping closer. "Have you seen her?" Ma's shoulders rolled in emotion halfway between a shrug and a frown. "Saw her. Didn't end well." Cold dread clawed up Mark's spine. "What do you mean?" "Men took her," Ma said flatly. "3 of them. Rough types." Mark's gut twisted. "When? Few hours ago. She fought too. Scratched one of them good across the face. But what's a little scrap like her gonna do against 3 grown men?" Mark's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. "Which way?" Ma jerked one of her arms toward the east, the direction of the industrial district. "Wouldn't bother if I were you." Those were Krell's men. The name hit him like a punch. Everyone in New Prospect knew Drayden Krell. He wasn't just a criminal. He was the criminal, the Shadow King, who ran half the colony from behind the scenes. Gambling, drugs, extortion, trafficking. If it was dirty, Krell had his claws in it. People whispered his name, but avoided saying it too loudly, as if the syllables themselves could summon his wrath. Mark's stomach churned. Krell's men didn't just take strays off the street for fun. If they had taken Siri, she was as good as dead, or worse. "Thanks, Mark," muttered, already moving. "Your funeral human," Ma called after him. Maybe it was, but he couldn't shake the image of Siri's wide, fearful eyes as she clutched that stale bread. He couldn't shake the sound of her voice when she whispered, "Thank you." He had left her there thinking food would be enough, and now she was gone. He wasn't going to abandon her a second time. Mark's boots pounded against the metal streets as he pushed deeper into the industrial district. The air grew thicker with smoke and ozone. Machinery rumbled like distant thunder. The glow of neon signs gave way to the harsh glare of floodlights, illuminating warehouses and processing plants. His destination was clear: the Rusty Gear, a gambling den notorious for its ties to Krell's operation. If his men had taken Siri, someone there would know where she had been brought. The entrance was guarded by a hulking Torgan, his leathery skin cracked like old stone eyes, small and suspicious. The brute crossed his massive arms as Mark approached. "Business," the Torgan rumbled. "Need to see Krell," Mark said, forcing a casual tone. The guard snorted. "Boss don't see nobody without an appointment." Mark hesitated only a second before slipping a credit chip from his pocket. It represented nearly a week's worth of overtime pay. He held it out. Just need a few minutes. The Torgan eyed the chip, then snatched it with surprising dexterity. He ain't here. Try the back rooms. Don't make trouble. Mark nodded once and stepped inside. The rusty gear was a chaos of flashing lights, alien laughter, and the constant chime of gaming machines. Miners shouted over rigged dice games. Vexillian dancers twirled on a stage beneath flickering holograms. The air smelled of cheap liquor and desperation. Mark moved through the crowd, scanning faces. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe Krell's lieutenants, maybe a whisper of the girl with blue skin. His heart hammered with each step. Then a server droid drifted toward him, its optical sensors flickering. Beverage, sir. Mark leaned in. Information. 3 of Krell's men brought in a Lydian girl today. Blue skin, silver hair. Where would they take her? The droid's processor's word. Processing request. Unable to comply. Security protocols engaged. Mark cursed under his breath. Override code Epsilon 93, said a melodic voice behind him. Mark spun. Standing there was a woman unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her skin shimmered a deep emerald green, glowing faintly under the den's dim lights. Long black hair fell in waves across her shoulders. She wore a form-fitting medical uniform that accentuated her curves in a way that made Mark's breath hitch despite the danger. Her eyes were amber-slit pupilled like a cat's, and they studied him with amused curiosity. The droid blinked. Override accepted. Query 3 Torgans, matching description, escorted unidentified Lydian female to processing facility 7, approximately 4.3 hours ago. Mark's pulse quickened. He had a lead. The green-skinned woman dismissed the droid with a wave, then turned back to him. You're looking for the Lydian girl. It wasn't a question. Mark swallowed hard. How do you know? Because I am too, she said, extending a slender hand. I'm Nara, medical officer at the colony clinic. Mark shook her hand, his calloused fingers brushing against her surprisingly warm skin. Mark Hayes, mechanic. He allowed a wry smile, an apparently rescuer of damsels in distress. Nara's lips curved into a smile that sent heat rushing through him. Interesting hobby for a mechanic. She needed help, Mark said simply. Her amber eyes glimmered. So she does. And if we don't move quickly, we may be too late. Mark nodded grimly. Together they turned toward the back of the rusty gear, toward the shadowed alleys that led deeper into the industrial district. The night seemed to grow colder as they stepped into the darkness. Ciri was out there somewhere in Krell's clutches, and Mark Hayes was determined to bring her back. The industrial district was quieter than the colony's central streets, but no less dangerous. The soundscape shifted from drunken laughter and neon advertisements to the heavy groan of machinery, the distant clang of automated loaders, and the hiss of steam vents. Shadows stretched long across the cracked pavement, and the air was thick with smoke that carried the sharp tang of ozone. Mark and Nara walked side by side, their footsteps echoing off corrugated metal walls patched with years of neglect. The green-skinned woman moved with the kind of poise that stood out in a place like this. Her stride was confident, measured like a predator who knew every angle of the hunt. Mark had to fight the urge to glance at her too often, not only because she was striking, but because he could feel something about her was carefully concealed. You're sure about Facility 7, Mark asked, at last, his voice low. Yes, Nara replied. The droid's memory banks are reliable once the override is accepted. Krell uses abandoned structures. The Eastern Company left that facility years ago when they switched to automation. Now it's perfect for his business, isolated, shielded, forgotten by the colony's records. Mark frowned. And what kind of business is that? Nara's amber eyes glinted in the dim light. Trafficking. Exotic beings' rare talents. Krell sees them as merchandise. And a young Lydian female she'd fetch a high price. Especially if he knows what she is. Mark's stomach tightened. What she is? Nara studied him for a moment before answering. You really don't know. I just met her this morning, Mark said honestly. She was hungry. That's all I saw. A flicker of surprise softened Nara's expression. Interesting. Most people see only opportunity or threat when they look at someone like her. But you... She shook her head. Never mind. Let's just say Ciri might be far more valuable than either of us realized. They turned down a narrow service alley where dim security lights flickered, illuminating graffiti scrawled in alien languages. A rat-like creature skittered into the shadows as they passed. Mark adjusted the bundle of tools at his vest. He carried no weapon, but he had learned long ago that even a wrench could be deadly in the right hands. "You're a doctor," he asked, glancing at Nara. "Medical officer," she corrected, though the corner of her lips quirked in amusement. "I work at the colony clinic, yes, but I also have other responsibilities." Mark raised a brow. "Responsibilities like overriding security droids in a gambling den." Nara's smile widened. "Exactly like that." They reached an intersection where the streetlights had long since burned out. The shadows here were heavy, and Mark instinctively slowed. Nara did the same, her hand slipping to the holster concealed beneath her uniform. The gleam of a compact blaster appeared briefly before she tucked it back against her hip. "You came armed," Mark noted. "Of course," Nara said smoothly. "One doesn't survive in New Prospect by relying only on good intentions." Mark huffed a humorless laugh. "Guess I didn't get the memo." "Oh, I think you did," she countered. "You just carry your weapon differently." Her gaze flicked to the heavy wrench clipped at his vest. "Tools can be as dangerous as any gun in skilled hands. And judging by the way you move, you've had to defend yourself before." Mark didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence told enough. As they continued, the distant glow of Facility 7 appeared at the edge of the industrial sprawl. The structure loomed like a corpse of metal and rust, its windows dark, its walls streaked with corrosion. Once it had been a processing plant, its machinery refining ore before shipment off-world. Now it stood as a husk repurposed for darker purposes. Mark slowed, taking in the ominous silhouette. If Krell's using this place, it won't be unguarded. "Of course not," Nara agreed. "But there are ways inside, maintenance tunnels, service conduits. I've studied this area." Mark gave her a sharp look. "Studied? What exactly are you, Nara? Because you don't sound like just a doctor." She met his gaze without flinching. "I told you. I have responsibilities. My people, the Verdani Conclave, monitor activities that threaten regional stability. Krell has been on our watch list for some time." Mark blinked. "So you're a spy." "An intelligence gatherer," she corrected smoothly. "But yes. And before you ask, I'm helping you because our goals align. You want to save Siri. I want to stop Krell. Together we might actually succeed." Mark let out a breath. "Great. I'm teaming up with a spy. What could possibly go wrong?" Her amber eyes sparkled with a hint of amusement. "Plenty. But you're still here, which means part of you trusts me already." Mark didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. They crouched behind a stack of rusted shipping containers surveying the facility's front entrance. Two guards stood, watch-pulse rifles slung across their chests. Their posture was casual, but their eyes were sharp. A direct approach was suicide. "Any other way?" and Mark whispered. Nara nodded. "There's a maintenance tunnel beneath the complex, but to reach it, we'll need a distraction." Before Mark could respond, a sudden noise echoed from within the facility, shouts followed by the distinct whine of energy weapons firing. Both guards tensed, then sprinted toward the commotion, leaving the entrance momentarily unguarded. Nara's hand shot out, gripping Mark's arm. "That's our chance. Move." They dashed across the open ground, slipping through the yawning entrance, just as more shouts erupted from deeper inside. The air was thick with smoke, the walls lined with long dead machinery. Sparks danced across the floor where stray shots had struck. Mark ducked behind a crate, pulling Nara with him. "What the hell is going on?" "I don't know," she admitted, eyes scanning the smoke. "But whatever it is, it's not part of Krell's plan." A crash sounded nearby, followed by the unmistakable thud of a body hitting metal. Mark peered around the crate and froze. A Torgan guard, massive and heavily armed, was hurled through the air as if struck by an invisible hand. He slammed into the wall with bone-crunching force and slid motionless to the floor. From the swirling smoke, a small figure emerged. Her blue skin glowed faintly, her silver hair lifting in an unseen current. Around her, objects floated: tools, metal scraps, even a discarded rifle, all orbiting like satellites around a planet. Her enormous eyes blazed with light. "Siri," Mark breathed. She didn't look like the frightened, starving girl he'd met that morning. She looked like something else entirely. Something powerful, dangerous, and regal. Beside him, Nara's voice was hushed, reverent. Telekinesis, a royal trait, By the stars, she really is. Another guard appeared shouting and firing wildly. Siri's gaze snapped toward him. With a sharp gesture, the man was lifted off his feet and hurled into the ceiling, collapsing in a heap. We need to reach her before she brings the whole place down, Mark said urgently. He rose from cover hands, raised to show he meant no harm. Siri, it's me, Mark from this morning. Her glowing eyes flicked toward him. The floating objects wavered. For an instant, confusion replaced rage. The sandwich, she said, her voice oddly calm amid the chaos. You gave me your sandwich. That's right, Mark said, taking a careful step forward. I'm here to help you. This is Nara. She's a doctor. Siri's gaze shifted to Nara's suspicion flaring again. Not doctor. Hunter. They all hunt me. Nara quickly holstered her blaster, raising her hands. No, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because I know who you are. The objects around Siri spun faster. What am I? She demanded. Nara drew a steady breath. You're Princess Suriana Vexillar of Exilar, second daughter of the Lydian High Council, and you're injured. Mark's eyes widened as he finally noticed a dark stain spreading across Siri's side, blood seeping through the torn fabric. The girl swayed, her strength faltering even as her powers lashed wildly. Let us help you, Mark urged, his voice thick with sincerity. I promise no one will hurt you again. For a heartbeat, the tension hung thick in the smoke-filled air. Then Siri's shoulders sagged. The objects clattered to the ground one by one. Her glow faded, leaving her small and fragile once more. It hurts, she admitted softly, pressing a trembling hand to her side. Nara moved swiftly, catching the girl before her knees buckled. We need to get her out of here, she said urgently. Now. Mark nodded, his jaw set. Facility 7 was collapsing into chaos around them. But in that chaos, a truth had been revealed. The starving alien girl who had eaten scraps like a dog was no beggar. She was a princess, and the galaxy would never be the same once her secret came to light. Facility 7 was a graveyard of machines and shadows. Its walls streaked with corrosion and its floors littered with broken tools. The smoke from scattered firefights clung to the corridors like a choking fog. Alarms blared in uneven intervals, their shrill tones blending with the hiss of ruptured pipes. Mark moved quickly, guiding Nara and Siri down a narrow passage. The girl leaned heavily against Nara's side, her steps unsteady but determined. The faint blue glow of her skin still lingered, though her powers had dimmed with her strength. We can't stay here, Nara said, glancing back at the smoke-filled chamber where Siri had unleashed her fury. Krell's men will regroup. They'll bring reinforcements. Then we don't give them the chance, Mark replied grimly. His wrench hung heavy at his side, but his mind was already racing. Escape routes cover weak points in the facility's structure. His mechanic's brain worked as fast as any strategist's. Siri's voice came soft, strained. Why? Why help me? You don't even know me. Mark slowed enough to meet her gaze. Because I saw you, not just an alien, not just another stray. I saw a person who needed help. That's enough. Her eyes shimmered, not just with exhaustion, but with something deeper, an emotion Mark couldn't yet name. They reached a junction where the hallway split. Nara pulled a compact scanner from her belt and studied it. Left. Maintenance tunnels run beneath the main chamber. They'll lead us toward the eastern exit. Before they could move, heavy footsteps echoed from behind. Voices barked orders in harsh tones, accompanied by the whine of charging pulse rifles. Krell's men were close. Mark cursed under his breath. Go. I'll hold them off. Nara's eyes narrowed. You'll get yourself killed. Then you'd better make sure she survives, Mark shot back. But before either could act, Siri pushed away from Nara, her slender frame trembling, yet defiant. Her luminous eyes blazed anew. No, she said firmly. I won't run again. The air shifted. Tools along the wall rattled. Debris lifted off the floor, spinning slowly around her like moons caught in orbit. A hum vibrated in the air, subtle at first, then rising into a crescendo of unseen energy. Mark's breath caught. He had seen her powers before, but this was different. Controlled. Focused. The first of Krell's mercenaries rounded the corner, weapons raised. Siri lifted her hand. The rifles ripped from their grips, clattering against the ceiling. The mercenaries were hurled back by an invisible force, slammed into the walls with bone-snapping impact. Their screams echoed briefly before fading into silence. Dust rained from the ceiling. Sparks danced across exposed wires. The very air seemed to vibrate with her presence. Nara whispered almost reverently, "By the stars, she's more powerful than I imagined." But Ciri's knees buckled again, and she gasped in pain, clutching her side where blood still seeped. The glow flickered, and the floating debris crashed to the ground. Mark was at her side, instantly steadying her. "Easy. Don't push it. You're hurt." Her eyes met his fierce despite her weakness. "If I don't push, we all die." The conviction in her voice sent a chill through him. She wasn't just a frightened girl anymore. She was something else, something greater. Nara knelt beside her, tearing open a seal bandage from her kit. "Hold still, princess. I need to stabilize you." Ciri flinched at the word. "Don't call me that." Nara's amber gaze softened. "You can deny the title all you want, but the bloodlines don't lie. The markings on your skin, your abilities, they belong to House Vexillar. You are Ciriana, daughter of the High Council. The galaxy believes your family dead, but you survived." Ciri shook her head violently, tears streaking through the grime on her cheeks. "My family is dead. I am nothing, just a girl eating scraps." Mark placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You're not nothing. I saw it the moment you looked at me. You're more than they want you to believe." For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the crackle of distant fires. Then Ciri exhaled shakily and allowed Nara to seal her wound. The bandage hissed as it tightened around her ribs, slowing the bleeding. The trio pressed on deeper into the facility's bowels. The tunnels grew darker, lit only by the occasional flicker of failing lamps. The air was damp and carried the stench of rust and mold. Mark led the way, his instincts guiding them through the maze of forgotten corridors. Every groan of metal, every echo of footsteps made his pulse quicken. At last, they reached a service hatch that opened into a cavernous chamber. Rusted machinery loomed in the shadows, and conveyor belts stretched into darkness. The silence was thick, oppressive. "This was the quarantine wing," Nara murmured. "Perfect for Krell's operation. Cells to hold the merchandise, isolated, hidden." The word merchandise made Mark's stomach churn. He could picture Ciri locked in one of those cells, stripped of dignity, sold like property. Rage flared hot in his chest. A faint sound cut through his thoughts, a whimper. Mark froze, raising a hand for silence. He strained his ears. The sound came again, faint but unmistakable. He followed it, weaving between rusting machines until he found a row of cages. Inside were beings of every shape and color, Vexillians, Torgans, even a few humans. All malnourished, all terrified. Their eyes widened as Mark approached, hope flickering in their hollow faces. Stars above Nara whispered fury etched into every syllable. "This is worse than I imagined." Mark gritted his teeth. "We can't leave them here." "We can't free them all now," Nara countered sharply. "Our priority is Ciri." But Ciri's hand pressed against the cage bars, her luminous eyes shimmering with tears. "We can't just walk away." Mark looked at her, then at the prisoners. His jaw tightened. "We'll come back for them. I swear it. But right now, if Krell catches you, none of us get out alive." Ciri hesitated, torn between her compassion and survival. At last, she nodded reluctantly, her shoulders slumping. As they turned to leave, a voice echoed through the chamber, deep and cruel. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Mark spun. From the shadows emerged a tall figure draped in dark armor. His reptilian skin gleamed in the faint light, his eyes cold and merciless. Even before the name left Nara's lips, Mark knew who it was. Krell. The crime lord's smile revealed sharp predatory teeth. Behind him, more mercenaries stepped into the chamber, weapons drawn. "You've caused quite a mess," Krell drawled, his gaze sliding to Ciri. "And all for this little stray. I should thank you. Saves me the trouble of hunting her down again." Ciri's body trembled, but her eyes burned with defiance. Mark stepped in front of her, wrench in hand, though he knew it was hopeless against pulse rifles. "You'll have to go through me first." Krell chuckled darkly. "Oh, I intend to." The chamber fell into tense silence, broken only by the hum of charged weapons. And then in the stillness, something inside Ciri ignited. Her glow returned, brighter than before. The debris around them lifted once more, orbiting in a storm of raw power. The very floor trembled underfoot. Krell's smug expression faltered as the air vibrated with her energy. Ciri stepped forward, her voice steady, regal. I am not your merchandise. I am not your prisoner. I am Seriana of Exelar, daughter of Exelar, and I will not be broken. The storm of objects whirled faster, forming a shield around her. The mercenaries hesitated, fear flickering in their eyes. Mark stared, awe and pride flooding through him. She wasn't the girl he'd met on the diner's windowsill anymore. She was something else, something destined for more. And as the chamber erupted into chaos, Mark knew one thing for certain: nothing about their lives would ever be the same again. The chamber was chaos. Krell's mercenaries opened fire streaks of energy bolts cutting through the haze. Ciri's telekinetic storm whirled around her, plucking the shots from the air and hurling them harmlessly aside. Metal shards flew like daggers, forcing the mercenaries back. Mark darted forward, wrench in hand, using the storm as cover to knock one soldier off balance before slamming the tool into the man's temple. The mercenary collapsed in a heap. "Move," Nara shouted. She fired her blaster with deadly precision, each shot dropping another of Krell's thugs. But more poured into the chamber, drawn by the noise. Ciri's glow flickered again as exhaustion gnawed at her strength. Sweat streaked her face, mixing with grime and blood. "I can't hold it much longer," she gasped. Mark grabbed her hand. "Then we get out now." Nara led the way toward a side corridor, blasting open the security lock with a well-aimed shot. The door screeched as it slid open, and they dashed through Mark, half-dragging Ciri as her legs threatened to give out. Behind them, Krell's furious roar shook the chamber. "Don't let them escape." The corridor was narrow, lit by dim red emergency lights. Sirens wailed overhead. Their footsteps pounded against metal grating as they ran, weaving through a maze of passageways. Nara moved like she had memorized the layout, guiding them unerringly toward the lower levels. At last, they reached a rusted maintenance hatch. Nara crouched, prying it open. A gust of damp, stale air rushed out. "Tunnel," she said. "They'll take us beneath the facility." Mark hesitated only a second before lowering Ciri through the hatch, then dropping in after her. Nara followed, sealing the hatch behind them just as shouts echoed down the corridor. The tunnels were pitch black except for the faint glow of Ciri's skin. The air smelled of mildew and rust. Water dripped steadily from somewhere above, echoing like a heartbeat. Mark steadied Ciri as they pressed forward. Her breathing was shallow, every step a struggle. "We need to stop," he said softly. "No," Ciri whispered. "If we stop, they'll catch us." Nara shone a small light from her wristband, illuminating the cramped space. "We'll find a safe spot to rest soon. She needs treatment. If that wound festers..." Ciri shook her head stubbornly, but Mark could feel her trembling. They walked in silence for several minutes, the only sounds their breathing and the distant rumble of machinery above. Finally, Nara slowed, motioning them into a wider alcove. Rusted pipes lined the walls, and old crates were stacked haphazardly in the corner. It wasn't much, but it offered a moment's respite. "Sit," Nara ordered, gently guiding Ciri to lean against the wall. She pulled a med kit from a hidden compartment in her uniform. As she worked applying antiseptic foam and tightening the bandage, Ciri winced but didn't complain. Her luminous eyes never left Mark. "Why?" she asked again. "Why risk so much for me?" Mark crouched beside her. He wanted to give an answer that made sense, something logical. But all he could say was the truth. "Because you matter, even if you don't believe it yet." Her lips parted as if she wanted to argue, but no words came. Nara glanced up, her amber eyes thoughtful. "He's right, Princess." Ciri flinched at the title again. "Stop calling me that." Nara's tone softened. "Do you know why Krell wants you?" Ciri's hands tightened into fists. "Because I'm different. Because of my powers." Nara shook her head. "Not just that. 3 days ago, a Lydian escape pod crashed in the Western Wastes. Records showed it originated from the Starlight Ascendant, the royal vessel destroyed by Drenid raiders. Everyone believed the High Council dead." She paused, studying Ciri's face. "But the pod wasn't empty, was it? It carried you." Tears welled in Ciri's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "My family, they're gone. The ship was burning, tearing apart. My father put me in the pod himself. He told me to survive." Her voice cracked. And then, nothing. Just fire and silence. Nara's hand stilled on the bandage, reverence in her voice. "That means you are Seriana of Exelar, daughter of the High Council. You are royal blood." Siri shook her head violently. No, I'm not a princess. I'm just a scared girl who scavenged scraps. A girl everyone ignored. That's who I am. Mark leaned closer. Maybe that's who you were forced to be. But it doesn't erase who you are. You're both. You survived hell, Siri. That doesn't make you less, it makes you more. For a long moment, Siri stared at him, breathing ragged. Then finally she looked away silent. Nara resumed her work, her voice grim. The drainage destroyed your ship for a reason. Do you know why? Siri hesitated. Because of what my father discovered. He told me before he sealed the pod, the Draenid Imperium is planning to strike 3 human colony worlds in the Arcturus sector. He had proof. That's why they silenced him. That's why they killed my family. The words hung heavy in the dank tunnel air. Mark's chest tightened. You're saying millions of people are about to die? Yes, Siri whispered, unless the warning reaches them in time. Nara's jaw clenched. If Krell realizes the value of what you carry, he'll sell you to the highest bidder or deliver you straight to the Draenid himself. What do you mean by carry? Mark asked sharply. Nara met his eyes. Lydian royals are more than figureheads. Their genetics are engineered to store data at the cellular level. She isn't just a witness, she is the evidence. The plans, the routes, the timetables, they're encoded in her blood. Mark stared at Siri in shock. She hugged her knees, suddenly small again, despite the power she had unleashed minutes ago. I didn't ask for this, she whispered. No one asked for destiny, Nara said softly. But here it is. Mark exhaled slowly, his mind racing. Then we need to get her off-world, to someone who'll listen. Earth Central Command, Nara agreed. They're the only ones who can rally defenses in time. And how do you propose we do that? Mark asked. Krell's got half the colony under his thumb. Security's probably bought. The starport is locked down. Nara's lips curved faintly, though her eyes remained serious. My people maintain a trading outpost beyond the Western Ridge. Verdani territory. If we reach it, they'll transmit the warning. Mark rubbed a hand over his face. That's a long way through hostile ground. It's our only chance, Nara replied firmly. Silence settled, broken only by the drip of water. Mark glanced at Siri. She sat slumped against the wall, exhaustion pulling her eyelids down, but her jaw was set with quiet determination. He reached over, brushing dirt gently from her silver hair. You're not alone anymore, Siri. We'll see this through, together. Her eyes fluttered open, meeting his. For the first time, she allowed herself a tiny, fragile smile. Nara watched the exchange, something unreadable flickering in her amber gaze. She cleared her throat. We should move. The longer we linger, the more dangerous this gets. Mark helped Siri to her feet. Then let's move. The tunnels stretched endlessly, twisting through the earth like veins. Sometimes they widened into abandoned chambers filled with rusted equipment. Sometimes they narrowed until Mark had to crouch. The stale air weighed heavy, and every distant echo made them freeze, hearts pounding. Hours seemed to pass before they finally emerged into a cavern that opened onto a fissure in the valley wall. Pale moonlight filtered through, bathing them in ghostly silver. Siri gasped softly, her eyes wide as she looked up at the sky. For the first time since the diner's window ledge, she didn't look like a beggar or a fugitive. She looked like someone remembering freedom. Mark followed her gaze, and in that moment, despite the danger, he felt hope. Beautiful, isn't it? He said quietly. Siri nodded. I'd forgotten the stars could look like that. But Nara's voice cut through the fragile peace. Don't get comfortable. Krell won't stop. Not until he has her back. And when he does, it won't just be her life at stake. It'll be every human colony in Arcturus. Mark tightened his grip on Siri's hand. His jaw hardened. Then he doesn't get her back. Not ever. The wind whispered across the ridge, carrying with it the scent of iron and dust. Ahead lay darkness, danger, and the impossible task of outpacing a crime lord who had an entire colony under his thumb. But Mark Hayes had already decided. He'd promised to come back for her once. He wouldn't break that promise again. The fissure opened into a network of abandoned mining tunnels carved decades earlier, when new prospects, first surveyors, thought Vidia's crust would yield easy wealth. Those days were long gone. The tunnels had been abandoned after tremors destabilized the shafts, leaving them dangerous, unpredictable, and perfect for fugitives trying to escape notice. Mark, Nara, and Siri moved cautiously, their footsteps muffled by thick dust. Every sound echoed too loudly, bouncing along the stone walls. The air was damp and heavy with mineral tang, and faint drafts whispered through cracks in the rock, carrying the scent of earth and oil. Siri leaned against the wall for support, her breathing ragged but steady. The wound in her side throbbed beneath Nara's bandages, yet she didn't complain. She held herself with quiet determination, her silver blue hair catching what little light filtered from Nara's wrist lamp. "We're close to the western ridge," Nara said, her voice hushed. "But these tunnels are unstable. Keep your weight low, avoid sudden movements." Mark glanced at Siri. "You think you can keep going?" Her luminous eyes flicked to his. "I don't have a choice, do I?" Mark managed a wry smile. "That's one way to look at it. But you're tougher than you think." Siri didn't answer, but her lips pressed into a thin line that suggested she'd taken the words to heart. They pressed deeper into the tunnels. The walls narrowed until Mark had to turn sideways, scraping his shoulders against jagged stone. At times, the ceiling dropped so low they were forced to crawl on hands and knees, the rock pressing down like the weight of the world. The air grew hotter, staler. Sweat dripped down Mark's back. Then the ground trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere above, stone groaned like an old ship hull under stress. "Quake," Nara hissed. "Move!" The tunnel shuddered violently. Rocks cracked and fell in sharp cascades. Mark threw himself over Siri as a chunk of ceiling collapsed, the impact reverberating through his bones. Nara rolled clear, covering them both as rubble piled behind. When the shaking finally ceased, they were trapped in a pocket of darkness. The tunnel behind them was sealed by rockfall, jagged boulders blocking any retreat. "Well," Mark muttered, coughing dust from his lungs, "guess forward's the only way left." Nara's amber eyes gleamed faintly in the lamplight. It always was. They moved on slower now. The path sloped upward, leading them to a chamber where mining equipment lay scattered and broken. Portable floodlights, long dead, hung from the walls. The floor was littered with abandoned drills, cables, and helmets covered in dust. But the chamber was dominated by a vertical shaft carved straight through the rock. It rose at least 30 meters, disappearing into faint moonlight high above. The walls were jagged but steep, littered with loose stones that would give way under careless hands. Mark craned his neck, whistling softly. "Looks like we climb." Nara tested the wall, her agile body moving like liquid as she searched for handholds. Doable. Difficult but doable, especially for her. Her gaze shifted to Siri. Siri frowned, her small frame dwarfed by the shaft. "I can climb," she said, stubbornness flashing in her tone. "You're injured," Mark reminded her gently. "Then I'll climb carefully." Siri snapped, her eyes blazing with the same fire that had hurled Krell's soldiers across a room. Before Mark could argue, tools and pebbles scattered around the chamber began to float, slowly rising into the air. Siri's body glowed faintly, the strain visible in her clenched jaw. "My powers," she said softly. "They don't just move things. I can make myself lighter. I can make the climb easier." Mark blinked, awe dawning on him. "You can levitate yourself." "Not fully." "Not yet," Siri admitted. "But I can help all of us." Nara arched a brow. "You're full of surprises, Princess." Siri shot her a glare. "Stop calling me that." But she stepped toward the shaft, placing her hands against the rock. A faint ripple spread outwards, small stones settling as if pressed by unseen hands. "It's stable for now. We should go." Mark tightened the straps of his vest and looked at Nara. "You go first. I'll follow with Siri between us." Nara smirked. "Giving me the view." Mark rolled his eyes, though heat crept up his neck. "Just climb." She moved with effortless grace, her body flowing upward like a dancer, every motion controlled and precise. Mark followed his heavier frame slower, his fingers digging into rough stone. Siri came after, her movement strangely smooth, as if the weight of her body had lessened. At times, when Mark's grip faltered and his foot slipped, he felt an invisible push steady him, Siri's unseen hand guiding him back to safety. "Thanks," he muttered upward. Her soft reply floated down. "Humans are heavier than they look." Mark chuckled despite the burn in his arms. All muscle. Above him, Nara laughed, a sound light and melodic, cutting through the oppressive silence. "I'll look forward to verifying that claim personally." Even in the perilous climb, Mark's heart skipped. He didn't reply, afraid his voice would crack. The shaft narrowed halfway up, forcing them to wedge sideways through a jagged section. Mark's shoulder scraped raw against stone. Siri slipped once, a cry escaping her lips, but Nara reached down with a strong hand, pulling her up. For a brief moment, the princess clung to the Verdani spy, and something unspoken passed between them. Respect, maybe even kinship forged in survival. They climbed higher. The air grew cooler, fresher. A faint breeze whispered from above. Then the shaft shook. The sound of drones echoed faintly from below, mechanical wings, buzzing scanning beams slicing the dark. "Hunter drones," Nara hissed. "Krell's sending machines after us." Siri gasped, her glow flaring. Pebbles around her floated upward in panic. "They'll trace us." "Then we move faster," Mark said grimly. His muscles screamed, his arms burned, but he forced himself upward, pulling with everything he had. Nara reached the top, first hauling herself over the lip with cat-like ease. She turned immediately, extending a hand. Mark grasped it, muscles straining, as she helped pull him onto the ledge. Below, Siri struggled in the last stretch, her body trembling with exhaustion. Stones crumbled beneath her fingers. The faint glow of drone lights grew brighter in the shaft below. "I can't," she began, voice breaking. "Yes, you can," Mark shouted, lying flat on the ledge and reaching down. "Come on, Siri, take my hand." Her luminous eyes locked on his wide with fear. For a heartbeat, she was that same girl from the diner's windowsill, hungry, fragile, alone. But then her jaw tightened. She pushed upward, her body lifting as though buoyed by unseen currents. With a desperate surge, she reached his hand. Mark pulled with all his strength, hauling her onto the ledge, just as the first drone's searchlight pierced the shaft below. They collapsed together, gasping for breath. Nara was already on her feet, blaster ready, her eyes scanning the horizon. The shaft had opened onto a rocky plateau, bathed in the pale glow of Vidia's twin moons. The mining colony sprawled in the distance, its lights twinkling faintly like a dying constellation. But farther west, nestled against the mountainside, a cluster of elegant structures shimmered with faint energy barriers. Organic curves marked their architecture, glowing softly in hues of emerald and gold. "The Verdani outpost," Nara breathed. Relief softened her features. "We made it." Siri pushed herself upright, her shoulders straightening despite the blood still staining her side. For the first time, she carried herself not as a beggar or fugitive, but as something else. Someone stepping into her role, however reluctantly. Mark stared at her, his chest tightening with pride. "You did it," he said softly. Siri met his gaze. "We did it." Behind them, the shaft glowed with drone lights, mechanical voices echoing. Krell's forces would not be far behind. But for the first time since this began, hope was within reach. They weren't just running anymore. They had a destination. And for Siri, for Mark, for Nara, everything was about to change. The Verdani outpost rose from the mountainside like a living thing, its architecture an organic blend of crystal and root-like structures. Unlike the harsh metallic lines of New Prospect, the outpost seemed to breathe, its walls glowing faintly with bioluminescence, corridors curving like veins inside a colossal organism. For Mark, who had grown used to grease-stained workshops and prefabricated steel, it felt like stepping into another world. Guards awaited them at the entrance, tall and elegant, in shimmering armor that reflected hues of emerald and bronze. They carried weapons unlike any Mark had seen, sleek crystalline rifles pulsing with inner light. Their disciplined eyes flicked to Nara, then to Siri. "Observer Nara," one guard greeted, bowing slightly. "We received your emergency signal." "This is Princess Siriana Vexillar of the Lydian High Council," Nara said firmly, her voice carrying authority. "And this is Mark Hayes, human ally. We need immediate access to the subspace relay." The guards' expressions tightened with shock, but they recovered swiftly, gesturing them inside. The heavy doors sealed behind them, shutting out the cold winds of Vidia's plateau. Inside the outpost was even more wondrous. The walls pulsed faintly, as though alive, responding to their footsteps. Air circulated with a natural freshness that seemed impossible on a world like Vidia. Siri's eyes wide in awe, softening her exhaustion. For the first time in days, she looked less hunted and more like someone glimpsing the possibility of sanctuary. The trio was escorted to the communication chamber. Verdani technicians, their emerald skin patterned with bioluminescent veins, worked at consoles crafted from living crystal. Mark marveled as the crystalline surfaces shifted, reshaping themselves into interfaces under the technician's touch. "This way," Nara directed, guiding Siri to a scanning platform. One technician bowed. For security, we require identity verification. Siri stepped forward without hesitation, her small hand pressed against the crystalline scanners which glowed blue as it interfaced with her genetic code. I carry the royal marker of House Vexillar, she declared softly. The scanner hummed. Lights flickered. A technician leaned forward, eyes widening. Confirmed. Royal genetic sequence detected. Princess Siriana Vexillar lives. Mark felt the weight of the words. The frightened girl eating scraps was gone. Here stood a princess recognized at last. Siri straightened her chin, lifting with quiet dignity. I also carry something more, she said. She placed her other hand on the surface. Instantly, data flooded the crystal interface navigational charts, fleet positions, encrypted drained directives. The technicians gasped. One murmured biological data storage. The legends are true. The lead technician's face darkened as he scanned the information. The data confirms drained fleets massing in the Arcturus sector. 3 human colonies targeted. They will strike within 6 days. Then send the warning now, Nara urged. The Verdani bent over the consoles, initiating transmission. Mark watched fists clenched as the message shot through subspace. The weight of millions of lives hung in that signal. Transmission sent and acknowledged by Earth Central Command, a technician reported. Relief rippled through the room, but the reprieve lasted seconds. Alarms blared. Scarlet light bathed the chamber. A guard rushed in, his armor glowing brighter with agitation. Multiple vehicles approaching from New Prospect. Armed personnel, estimated 200. They're moving fast. Mark's stomach dropped. Krell. On a display screen, they watched grainy footage from outpost sensors. A convoy of mining transports tore across the plateau, jury-rigged with armor and heavy weapons. Krell's mercenaries clung to their sides, armed to the teeth. At the front, a massive armored crawler rumbled forward, and atop it stood Drayden Krell himself, scaled skin gleaming in the dawnlight. His amplified voice boomed over the outpost comms. Surrender the Lydian girl, or I will reduce this sanctuary to rubble. Siri flinched, her glow dimming. Mark clenched his fists. He's tracked us somehow. A technician's fingers danced over crystal controls. There's a signal inside the outpost emitting from her. His gaze darted to Siri. She's been tagged. Siri's hand flew to her side where the blaster wound marred her ribs. Horror dawned in her eyes. The shot. It wasn't just meant to wound. Nara cursed softly. They embedded a tracker in the injury. A hunter's trick. Can you remove it? Mark demanded. Not without surgery, the technician said. And we don't have time. Krell's forces will breach the outer defenses within minutes. Mark's mind spun, the mechanic in him grasping for solutions. The tracker transmits on a specific frequency, right? Yes, the technician confirmed. Then what if we build a decoy? Copy the signal, project it somewhere else. Nara's eyes widened. Draw Krell's forces away. Long enough for us to escape, Mark finished. They worked quickly. Mark, his hands steady, despite the adrenaline, dismantled a Verdani communication node and rewired its circuits, tuning it to mimic the tracker's frequency. The technicians aided him, their crystal consoles shifting into new configurations as if alive. Meanwhile, Nara laid Siri on a medical table, her touch gentler than Mark had ever seen. This will hurt, she warned, extracting delicate surgical tools. Siri nodded, eyes fierce. Do it! Mark glanced over as Nara made the incision. Her precision steady, her jaw tight. Siri didn't cry out, though her small hands clenched until her knuckles paled. At last, Nara held up a tiny shard of alien metal, the tracker gleaming with faint red light. Got it. Mark snatched it, inserting it into the modified node. Activating decoy now. On the display, half of Krell's forces veered east, chasing the false signal half a kilometer away. The mercenary convoy split dust plumes trailing across the plateau. But Krell himself didn't budge. He and his elite stayed locked on the outpost, relentless. He's not fooled, Nara muttered. Good, Mark said grimly. Let him come. At least we've thinned his numbers. The Verdani guards fortified the outpost, activating shielding that shimmered green across the walls. Crystal turrets unfolded like blooming flowers, energy pulsing in their cores. Outside explosions shook the plateau as Krell's mercenaries tested the defenses. Inside, the atmosphere grew taut. Siri lay pale but steady, her wounds sealed once more. She pushed herself upright, regal, despite exhaustion. I will not hide while others fight for me, she said firmly. I am not the girl on the windowsill anymore. I am Siriana Vexillar. Her voice carried such conviction that even the Verdani guards paused, bowing slightly. Mark's chest swelled with pride and fear. Just don't get yourself killed, he muttered. Ciri's luminous eyes met his. Not before I repay my debt. You gave me food when no one else would. I will not let that kindness be wasted. Outside, the outpost trembled under another blast. A guard's voice rang through the chamber. They've breached the first barrier. 2 hours until Verdani reinforcements arrived. 2 hours to hold against Krell himself. Mark picked up one of the crystalline rifles, its weight alien but oddly balanced in his hands. He glanced at Nara. She was already armed, her amber eyes glowing with battle-hardened determination. If we survive this, Mark said quietly, I don't want to just walk away from us. Nara's lips curved in a fierce smile. Humans, she whispered with a mix of exasperation and heat. Always so dramatic. You love it, Mark, replied his voice rough. Her smile was answer enough. The alarms blared louder. Explosions thundered. Krell's forces pressed the attack, clawing closer to the heart of the outpost. Mark tightened his grip on the rifle, Ciri at his side, Nara on the other. They were outnumbered, outgunned. But together they were ready. The siege had begun. The Verdani outpost shook under the force of another explosion. Dust sifted down from the living walls, their bioluminescence flickering like a heartbeat under strain. Sirens wailed throughout the chambers. The inner defenses, the last shield between Krell and his prize, were buckling. Mark adjusted his grip on the crystalline rifle, its glowing veins pulsing with energy. Across from him, Nara crouched with a soldier's poise, her blaster steady in hands that trembled with neither fear nor hesitation. Beside them, Ciri stood pale but upright, the faint glow of her skin making her look less like a refugee and more like a queen-to-be. The control room's comm system crackled. Second barrier breached. Krell is inside. Mark exhaled sharply. Showtime. The Verdani guards spread into defensive positions, their crystalline weapons humming like angry insects. From the corridor came the sound of booted feet, the clatter of armored mercenaries sweeping forward in waves. Wait for my mark, Nara whispered. The mercenaries poured into the chamber, weapons blazing. Green shields flared as Verdani defenders returned fire. Energy bolts ricocheted, cutting through the air like shards of lightning. Mark rolled to cover, firing his rifle. The alien weapon bucked lightly in his grip, releasing a pulse of searing energy that dropped a mercenary mid-charge. He grinned grimly. Not bad for alien tech. Nara was a storm, her emerald figure weaving through the chaos. Every shot from her blaster struck true, dropping enemies before they could react. Her movements were graceful, lethal, magnetic. Mark found it hard not to watch, even amid battle. But Ciri was the one who drew every eye. As Krell's forces pressed forward, she raised her hands and objects around her lifted into orbit. Metal fragments, broken consoles, even fallen weapons spun around her like a miniature galaxy. When mercenaries charged, she hurled debris with devastating force, crushing them against the walls. A few tried to shoot at her, only for their weapons to twist from their grip and explode in midair. Her eyes blazed with power. She was no longer the girl who had nibbled stale bread on a windowsill. She was Siriana Vexillar, and she commanded the battlefield like royalty. But then, with a deep guttural roar, Krell himself entered. The Draconid crime lord was monstrous in the glow of the chamber, towering scaled skin, glistening like forged metal claws tipped with gleaming hooks. His reptilian eyes locked on Ciri, hungry and cruel. Behind him, his elite guards spread out, hulking brutes armed with pulse cannons and serrated blades. Little Princess Krell hissed, his voice amplified by a collar device. You should have stayed in the gutter where you belong. Instead, you bring ruin on all who shelter you. Ciri's chin lifted. You'll never cage me again. Krell laughed, the sound like grinding stone. Cage nubbum, you are currency, child, and I am very wealthy. He lunged. Mark intercepted, swinging the crystalline rifle like a staff. The weapon cracked against Krell's scaled forearm, deflecting his strike, but the impact jarred Mark's entire body. The Draconid was immensely strong and humanly so. Run, Mark shouted. But Ciri didn't run. She planted her feet, hands outstretched, and an invisible force slammed into Krell, throwing him backward into a stasis field Mark had helped the Verdani rig earlier. For a heartbeat it seemed to hold, but Krell's body radiated raw power. He roared, straining, and cracks splintered through the energy matrix. "He's too strong," Nara shouted, firing into the breach. The blast slowed him but didn't stop him. The Verdani guards fell back under the weight of Krell's elite. For every mercenary dropped two more surge forward. "We need a plan," Mark yelled, ducking as a pulse bolt scorched the wall above his head. Ciri's voice rang clear, louder than the chaos. "We end this now, together." Her eyes blazed. Around her, the floating debris accelerated into a deadly storm. She hurled it with pinpoint precision, striking Krell's guards and scattering them like ragdolls. Nara leapt into the opening, moving with feline grace, cutting down survivors with her blaster. Mark dove into the control station, ripping open a crystalline panel. His mechanic's mind worked furiously, rerouting circuits, overloading capacitors. If he could push the stasis field into a full energy surge, maybe, just maybe, it could trap Krell for good. But Krell was already breaking free. With a final roar, he shattered the weakened field shards of energy, splintering across the chamber. His reptilian eyes locked on Ciri. "You're mine." He lunged again. Ciri didn't retreat. Instead, she stepped forward, her small frame trembling but resolute. The storm of objects around her spun faster, glowing with raw, telekinetic force. "You call me nothing," she said, her voice steady as stone. "But I am Ciriana Vexillar, daughter of the High Council, and I will not be owned." Krell swiped at her, but his arm froze mid-strike. His entire body convulsed, suspended in midair by her invisible grip. "You threatened my friends," Ciri continued, her tone rising. "You hunted me like prey. No more." With a flick of her wrist, she hurled the Draconid crime lord across the chamber, straight into the overloaded stasis field Mark had primed. The system shrieked as it activated, surging with raw energy. Krell screamed, his massive form caught in a cage of light, then froze, trapped in suspended animation. The remaining mercenaries faltered. Seeing their leader captured, their resolve crumbled. One by one, weapons clattered to the ground. Verdani guards surged forward, binding the survivors with glowing restraints. Silence fell. Mark slumped against the console chest, heaving. Nara lowered her blaster, her amber eyes glowing with fierce satisfaction. Ciri stood tall, shoulders squared, the glow of her power fading but her dignity brighter than ever. A Verdani technician hurried into the chamber. "The extraction team has arrived. 20 minutes until departure." Mark exhaled, finally allowing himself to believe. "We did it." "No," Ciri corrected gently, her eyes softening as she looked at him. "You did it. You saw a princess when everyone else saw a beggar. You gave me food when I had nothing. And you gave me hope." Mark shook his head, embarrassed. "It was just a sandwich." Ciri smiled faintly. "Sometimes the smallest kindness saves the galaxy." Nara slipped an arm around Mark's waist, pulling him close. Typical human understatement, she teased, her voice husky. "You risk your life, defy a crime lord, save millions, and call it just a sandwich." Mark glanced down at her, warmth rushing through him despite exhaustion. "Guess I'm predictable." Her amber eyes burned into his. "No, Mark Hayes, you're extraordinary." The extraction team arrived in a sleek Verdani vessel, its hull shimmering like polished emerald under the rising sun. As Ciri boarded, her hair gleamed silver blue, her royal markings glowing clean against her skin. She looked every inch the princess she was born to be, not because of her title, but because of her choices. At the ramp, she turned back. "When I reclaim my throne, when peace is restored, I will remember the human who saw me when no one else did." Mark bowed slightly, awkward but sincere. "I'll hold you to that, Your Highness." Ciri's luminous eyes softened with affection. Then she disappeared into the ship. Nara lingered beside Mark, her fingers tracing his jawline. "I've requested reassignment," she murmured. "Verdani liaison to Earth Central. My people are very interested in studying human compassion." Mark raised a brow, pulse quickening. "How extensive is this study?" Her lips curved. "Years, if my subject is willing." Mark pulled her close, his lips brushing hers. "Oh, I'm very willing." Their kiss was fierce, a promise forged in fire and danger. From the ship's viewport, Ciri watched them with a small smile. The girl who had eaten scraps was gone. In her place stood a princess ready to forge new alliances, beginning with the remarkable humans who had seen her worth. As the vessel lifted into the sky, Mark held Nara tight, the flames of the battle fading behind them. Sometimes he reflected, the greatest adventures begin with the smallest gestures. And sometimes, a sandwich really can save the galaxy.